During the pre-season, lots of people had differing opinions for the strength of each team, but with week 1 now in the books, and having seen every team play for the first time this season, I put together my first power rankings for the Overwatch League. If you'd like to just see the rankings video on its own, check out my previous video, which I'll link down below in the description. Otherwise I'll get into discussing why I ranked each team where I did. Looking at the bottom 3 teams first, we have the Florida Mayhem at 20, the Washington Justice at 19, and the Shanghai Dragons at 18. All these teams lost their opening week matches, with both the Justice and Mayhem performing about as poorly as most people had predicted in the pre-season. The Mayhem played a terrible 3-3 GOATS comp with a mishmash of players that don't seem to make any sense, whilst the Justice struggled just as much with the meta, with only a few bright spots from Janice and Corey. The single map win was more down to New York Excelsior playing a poor triple DPS comp than their own skill. But it is what kept them ahead of the Mayhem in the rankings. Despite losing both of their games and continuing the losing streak to 42, I thought that despite similar struggles with 3-3, at least the Dragons looked competitive while running their triple DPS, which gives players like DM a chance to shine. Next, we have the Houston Outlaws at 17 and the London Spitfire at 16, with both teams losing 2 games in the opening week. The Outlaws, despite some impressive tank play, particularly from Muma and Dante, were let down in both 5-map series by poor support play. Meanwhile, the Spitfire looks very uncomfortable in the 3-3 meta, and often relied on singular plays rather than team coordination to win teamfights. In spite of them not playing their games as close as Houston did, I ranked London higher by virtue of the opposition they faced, as I feel the combination of Paris and Philadelphia at this stage are far stronger teams than both Boston and Toronto. The game between the Guangzhou Charge, who we have at 15, and the Chengdu Hunters at 14 was perhaps one of the most underappreciated but enjoyable series of the week. These teams were neck and neck, therefore leading to them being side and side in the rankings. However, I felt the overall level of both triple DPS and the 3-3 comms were played a little haphazardly by both teams, which resulted in long drawn out teamfights where players were fighting each other in 1v1s or 2v2s around the point. Perhaps this disruption was intended due to the Hunters' major use of Hammond, even in their 3-3 comms, but I'll need to see these teams again against other competition to really have a good idea where they stand. These 2 teams are followed by the Toronto Defiant at 13, the Boston Uprising at 12, and the LA Valiant at 11. Given the results of these teams, you might expect them to be in reverse order, but I feel given the strength of opposition each team faced, I've ranked them in the correct order for now. Whilst Toronto did win their only game, it was against the Outlaws and took a game 5, so even though they look solid, especially with Envy standing out, I want to see more, especially when Nako returns, before I move them higher. Boston was perhaps the most surprising team of the week, who despite the same result as the Defiant to the Outlaws, looked incredibly strong on the 3-3 GOATS comp, behind in-game leader Fusions. I held them back to this spot however, since it is obvious how one-dimensional this team is, and I reckon it may be their Achilles heel moving forward. Then, with the Valiant, although they looked very impressive, especially Space in their loss to the Spark, I want to see more of their play, and understand why Kuki is starting ahead of Custer at main support, before I move them into the top 10. Speaking of, the teams that first make up the top 10 are the Dallas Fuel at 10, the LA Gladiators at 9, the Seoul Dynasty at 8, and the San Francisco Shock at 7. I rank these teams by their place in the standings, given they formed a circle of winning and losing to one another, so should be considered as almost even for now. Dallas is at 10 purely for their Jekyll and Hyde performance. One game looking terrible, and the next looking super strong with great Sombra play, and AKM playing an outstanding game. They are followed by the Gladiators, who despite the strongest support play of the 4 teams, due to Big Goose and Shaz, at times looked like they were still getting comfortable with new main tank Raw, who himself needs to learn how to hit earth shatters. The Dynasty themselves pulled a similar stunt as a Fuel, but in reverse. The synergy between Fisher and Ryu Jae-hong looks great, but despite showing his flexibility, particularly on Sombra, Michelle was heavily restricted, perhaps by his coaches, against the Fuel. Not to mention, Jexay was often caught out of position. Lastly, the Shock demonstrated how strong their 12-man squad is in their 2 games with solid play in all positions. They, like Boston, need to be careful not to heavily telegraph their tactics, as their composition is obvious when they bring in Striker and Rascal, who themselves cannot at this time effectively switch to a 3-3 if required. At 6, we have the Paris Eternal, who impressed against the Spitfire in their only game of the week. Soon looks to have sustained a high level of play from last year, and both supports Hip and Cruised impressed tremendously in their debuts. This is a team that looks very comfortable playing aggressive in this meta, but given the apparent weakness of London and the lack of other games to go on, they'll hold this position for now. After much deliberation, I placed the New York Excelsior at 5 and the Atlanta Reign at 4, despite the superior record for the NYXL. Perhaps even placing the NYXL this high is a surprise, given how they didn't look particularly great in their games to Boston and Washington. Their 3-3 could also still be refined, whilst their 3 DPS comp was poorly executed, but the best teams still get results even when they play poorly, and with the individual skill of players like Jonak and Nene standing out, I'll keep them at this high ranking for now. Atlanta, meanwhile, barely placed a foot wrong against Florida and highlighted the high level of play from their whole squad, with particular praise on the trio of Dafran, Dako and Pokpo, who stood out. But it was their 5-game series against the Fusion that validated their spot at 4, given how close they ran a top team, only really being let down by inexperience, which will be remedied as the stage continues. Finally, we reach the top 3, where I've ranked the Hangzhou Spark at 3, the Vancouver Titans at 2, and lastly, the Philadelphia Fusion, who sit at the top of the spot. All 3 of these teams stood out, with undefeated weeks and each looking very comfortable in this mainly 3-3 GOATS meta. Hangzhou comes out last of this trio, given their slightly inferior victory over the Dragons compared to the Titans, as well as the fact that it is tough to gauge the level of the Valiant without seeing them play more. That being said, this popular new team looked polished, refined and well coordinated in their victories, with particular focus on the tank trio of Gushui, No Smite and Rhea, who all looked outstanding in their victories, particularly in their ability to effectively use their ultimates. Given their only game was a 4-0 stomp of the Dragons, it could be argued that I'm overestimating the Titans, aka Runaway, at this early stage. But after rewatching their one match through again, I can't say that any other team plays the 3-3 composition any better, with Bumper the standout of an already star lineup. If they can show this same level of performance against a better team, then they will reach the top spot in no time. However, for now, that title will belong to the Philadelphia Fusion, who returned well with a convincing victory over London, before utilising their experience to triumph in a Game 5 over Atlanta. The play of Boombox on Zen and Carpe on Zarya stood out, as the pair's performances over these 2 games have made a strong case for arguing that they are best at their respective positions. And if this level of play remains consistent, they will be a lock for the playoffs at the end of the season. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and be sure to check back next week for my Week 2 power rankings and discussion. Or watch my other preview and review content on the Overwatch League.